Welcome to Parallel Lives. I'm Dimmer, and this is my co-host Levi.
Hello.
In this episode, we're actually talking to Jayne Rachael, a maladaptive daydreaming advocate, researcher, and former patient. In fact, you were aside from the 6 from the seminal study, the first one that Sommer did in 2002, you were the first maladaptive daydreaming patient.
I was at least written up in any sort of journal article. And I know that because I spent years and years looking, trying to find anything in their literature. I'm sort of dating myself, but unlike today, when I was in college, there was no internet. So I would there were these old-fashioned psychology databases, and I spent hours and hours looking for anything. I looked for daydreaming addiction, television show in your head. I just tried every single search term on the planet and nothing came up. And it wasn't until, I guess, the early 2000s that I found Dr. Sommer's article. And I think that was the first article that I'd ever seen about maladaptive daydreaming. And there was 6 patients in it. And then after that, mine came out a few years later.
That was a case study, right?
Yeah. In fact, I went to my psychiatrist and I was like, what I actually had found, so I found 2 things. So after years of coming up with nothing, I found, before I found Dr. Sommer's article, I found there's this obscure website about people in India with parenting. And there was an article about children who just daydream a little too much, and the article itself didn't seem to resonate with me at all. It was just about, sometimes kids aren't paying attention when they're in school. And that didn't really intrigue me. But when I looked at the comment section, I was floored because I had spent a whole lifetime of looking for some daydream like me. And there were hundreds of posts of people saying that they had these daydream worlds that they felt that they were addicted to. Many of them paced like I had when I was a child. Everybody knew it wasn't real, but they felt like they were addicted to these worlds. And I had never, ever seen anyone in my entire life who daydreamed in that manner. So I was stunned. And I then did a little bit of more empirical article. That's when I found Dr. Sommer's article, which I found very intriguing, but seemed slightly different from my experiences, because Dr. Sommer's first article about the 6 people, I believe it was 6, they had all experienced extreme childhood abuse and trauma, because that was his background. He was working in a trauma practice. No real, if I remember correctly, no ability to function in the real world, no friends, no family, no job. And that wasn't me. So I was intrigued, but didn't quite see myself in that. So I brought those 2 things to my psychiatrist, and I was like, you need to write me up as a case study to show that this is broader than, that there's hundreds of people, not just 6, and some of them seem to be like me, not having that extreme trauma, and also having having a real life as well, but still feeling that this maladaptive daydreaming is something that troubles them.
So there's something I've always wondered. The cool thing about Jayne is that you are, unlike other maladaptive daydreaming researchers, you're actually a maladaptive daydreamer.
Yes.
So this is what I've always sort of wondered. When you went to your psychiatrist and you were like, write me up as a case study, why did they listen to you? I can't imagine I could just walk up to a psychologist and be like, write me up, and they would actually do it.
The world was a different place, right? So the internet, there weren't hundreds of chat rooms, and I'd seen a psychiatrist for several years then, right? And I was doing really well because he had put me on some medication called fluvoxamine, Luvox for short, that's an SSRI, sort of in the same family as Prozac or Paxil, but more typically given for OCD. And it had worked really well. But I kept trying, it just bugged me. I still was like, I can't be the only person on the planet who have these symptoms. And I kept asking him, have you ever seen anyone like me? And I still continue to ask people. And the answer was oh, no, not really. And so when I showed him, I printed out the pages and pages of people who had similar experiences. And he thought that was fascinating. I was like, look, there are other people just like me, and they don't know that maybe Luvox could work. Someone needs to see that. So I suggested that he write me up as the case study, and he did have someone who worked with him who wrote up his interesting cases. Back then, again, it's such a different world. Like back then, nowadays half the world is on medication and everybody's open online. But back then, I was really terrified of anybody finding out it was me. So I did not, my name was not in it, but I did help with the writing of it. But I think it was because I had a relationship with him for several years, and I had these stacks of posting. It's not for doctors to see something that they've never seen before is sometimes interesting. If you get a good doctor, and he's also, he's a brilliant psychiatrist. I think a lot of doctors, when they get something new, don't know what to do with it. But those who are intellectually curious are like, wow, this is fascinating. So that was his response.
Hello, this is Levi, the co-host of Parallel Lives. I'm jumping in to mention that we had some technical difficulties in regards to the output of our audio recordings. So for the parts that are important but didn't record correctly, I'll just be translating or re-recording what's been said at a specific time. In regards to medical and mental health professionals learning more about maladaptive daydreaming, do you feel that more of them would be open to new information despite maladaptive daydreaming not being part of the DSM? Or rather, how do you think we can get more medical and mental health professionals to accept this as something that's true and real?
I mean, I definitely think so that was back in 2008. I think, and so years before that, I mean, in my early teenage years, I saw several doctors who were just like, never heard this before. Doesn't sound like a problem to me. I will say one psychiatrist in my teenage years was like, she was pretty smart and said, I've never heard of this before, but I don't know what it is, but it sounds like it's taking up a lot of time and energy. And I can't imagine that as you're an adult and get more responsibilities, that it's not going to be a problem. So she tried me on Prozac, which I thought, I do feel like the psychiatrists are more willing to experiment than other doctors. I've also had a whole host of like unknown medical conditions in my life. And I have noticed the mental health field being a little more open to experimenting. They're like, well, we don't know what this is. We might as well try you. So they tried me on Prozac, and that did not do anything for me. Different medications work for different people. So I did feel like the field was open to studying, but it's hard. Like from their perspective, having studied some psychology in my life, when you're taught abnormal psychology and it's not mentioned anywhere, it's not in any textbook, it's not in any, taught in any abnormal. I do think it's slightly easier today because you can show. Now there's some, not only is there my case study, but Dr. Eli Somer out of Israel, who I think is the world's, leading researcher on this topic. And I worked with him to help create a tool. So like now there's empirical articles. So any good mental health professional should be willing to do some research and read articles. My recommendation for people who are struggling is to reach out to mental health professionals, but bring the research with them. If there's someone who's interested and intellectually curious, they'll read those articles. Maybe I've had doctors reach out to me. I'm sure doctors have also reached out to Dr. Somer.
Over here, Jayne just mentioned that if you can find a good doctor or psychologist, they'll be willing to reach out. But if you have someone who denies that it's a real condition because it's not in the DSM, then you need to find another doctor or psychologist.
But I do think in general today, it's got to be a lot easier because there are, it's not in the DSM, but there's real research behind it. Unfortunately, what's still not there is too much research on how to treat it, because when we're just starting in the last couple of years to document its existence, it means that you don't have teams of people researching the treatment effects. Again, I think Dr. Somer might be the only one. So it's a little harder on knowing how to treat it, but at least there is a body of research for doctors to look at. And that's my really number one advice for any patient who's seeking mental health. Come in with articles. I wrote an article in The Atlantic, which explains my story as well as some of the early research in the field. If you bring that, I think I would also recommend my case study because it showed at least that Luvox worked for me. And then some of Dr. Sommer's more recent work. And if you bring that stack of material to a doctor, I think anybody who's intellectually curious and is a good mental health professional should be interested in reading and learning about it.
Right, and the research is constantly being looked at and constantly being studied. So it's also reliable in that sense.
And we really have to say a huge shout out to Dr. Sommer because, there's he's got so many publications on it now. And that's what's giving it the validity, right? If he wasn't doing that and there was just, if there was nothing to show, the doctors and psychiatrists, it would be much harder. But at least for now, there's an extensive body of research that did not exist when I was looking for help for, the first 25 years of my life. I don't exactly remember, but what I do think, at least when I first saw the 6 Daydreamers, I wasn't quite as excited as I was when I saw the Indian parenting site. And I think it's just because those 6 Daydreamers didn't seem like me, right? It made sense to me that if you were been abused as a child, that you're going to retreat into this fantasy world and that you might have no ability to function in the real world. And that just seems so far removed from my experience. So I was intrigued, especially the fact that he mentioned pacing and movement, because that's what I did as a child. I would spin around in circles, shaking a string or tree branch in my front yard as a child to get into my daydream worlds. I stopped later in teenage years, continued with the daydreaming, but stopped with that. But so that intrigued me. But I have to be honest that it was really this India parenting thing where there were people that hundreds of people just like me posting that intrigued me. So I think what often happens with research, people are working kind of in parallel places. So from there I did my case study, and then I went back to grad school to study psychology, and I worked on a study. I think it was about 90 people who called themselves maladaptive daydreamers, with a doctor named Cynthia Shupak, the person who wrote my case study. We partnered. And that, I think, was the first study where there were people, it was 90 instead of 6, who were more like me. So less far gone, right? More of an ability to function in the real world and not completely traumatized. And I remember a little being early on worried that Dr. Sommer was going to be troubled, or not troubled, but not agree with the fact, because his initial theory was that childhood trauma and abuse led to maladaptive daydreaming. And that was what was shown in the first 6 people that he did the case study. So I thought he was going to be a little skeptical of our research showing that not everybody had that degree of trauma. And it turned out not to be the case. And what we did is we collaborated on the next set of research, and we worked together.
Jayne mentions here that their research showed that trauma can precede maladaptive daydreaming, but it's not necessarily required, and is also not necessarily a prerequisite.
So we worked on, I think, 2 papers together. And then I kind of decided, I kind of gave up the research and decided I could do more good by just speaking out publicly. And he has just gone forward with the research ever since. But we were working sort of separately. I did that paper with 90 daydreamers. And what's so funny is that I'm so comfortable speaking about this now. And I think it's just the world has changed, because when I emailed Dr. Sommer, and he won't remember this, the first time I emailed him, I changed my name. I called myself Suzanne. That's how scared I was about anyone finding out that this was me. And then when my case study came out, a few reporters reached out to me, and one was, and he's still pretty mad at me to this day, because the New York Times was going to do a piece on it, but they wanted me to use my real name. And at the time, I just wasn't willing to do it. So they refused to run the article. And it's funny because now here I am talking all over it. But, I was in a different place. It was, how many years ago was that? Over 10 years ago. I was trying to have I was having a career in public policy and law. And it wasn't this age in the internet where everybody was talking about their mental health problems. And I didn't even want people to know that I was on medication. And I was just so afraid someone finding out it was me. And that's just completely changed. And I think some of that is just by like the fact that there's so many other people on the internet sites. Like for the longest time, I felt like I was the only one.
And you did get some I don't want to say hate mail because that's not at all what it was, but before you were Jayne, back when you were patient X still, and that case study came out, your psychiatrist, they got letters from other doctors saying, "Oh my God, no, don't do that."
Exactly. In fact, a big name in the daydreaming field was like, there's no such thing. Please don't medicate creativity. I will say he came around after I reached out to him directly. But there was this whole, it was, and again, it just the context was different. Like now there's like people are used to having debates on the internet, right? Um, this was 15 years ago, and there was a whole like, so my case study was there, and there was a comment section, and people were arguing like, sounds like she's a writer to me, like I can't believe they're medicating her. And then other people were like, no, 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 I have it too, and I understand it. And so like people were arguing about me, although they didn't know it was me. And it was the weirdest thing to go on the internet and see like a debate about your mental health by people you don't know. I will say for each letter or email that we got saying like, please don't medicate creativity, we got about 100 saying, oh my God, I know exactly what you're experiencing because I have it too. And I still, I wrote that piece in the Atlantic article. I think that was over 5 years ago. I still get emails, sometimes several a week, of people being like, "Oh my God, I never knew. Like I thought I was the only one." So it's still having a reach.
We all know that feeling. The moment I remember very vividly, the moment where I realized there were others and that this was a thing that not just I was experiencing. It was like a movie camera trick, that trick where like the main character's going through something and they sort of zoom in on their face while pulling out in the background. There's a name for that camera trick, but I can't remember what it is. It felt like that in real life. It was very strange. And a lot of MDers have that surreal, like a very strong reaction to finding out. It's crazy. Halo called it the eureka moment.
Yes. And especially like, again, I think it's probably little different for kids today, just because all you have to do is type in the word daydreaming into Google and you're going to see like insane numbers, right? But for me, like literally a lifetime. I mean, I remember in childhood trying to see if my friends did it, and they all just looked at me like I was crazy. And then like all those hours and hours researching psychology databases. I was a psychology major, like so I took every abnormal psych class. I took every, did as much research as possible, and like not even like forget maladaptive daydreaming, but until Dr. Sommer's article, not even any sort of link between like movement and pacing and daydreaming. Not like just like absolutely nothing. I'm on kind of a dual mission. I am on a mission to get maladaptive daydreaming more attention, but I've had like 2 health conditions that I needed the help of internet chat rooms to figure out what was going on. I do believe that the information lands on those pages before science is so slow, before science gets to it. So I'm a big crusader for the fact that doctors and researchers need to be looking at these chat rooms. And frankly, when I went back to grad school to study psychology, I had another that aha eureka moment I've had. So there was one when I found other maladaptive daydreamers, but then when I went back to grad school, I kind of got a sense of why I had so much trouble getting help, whether for my physical or mental health problems through the years. And it's because researchers like look at those websites or is like what they call anecdotal evidence, right? Meaning it's not scientific. And that's true. I agree. Like these websites are not science. But when thousands upon thousands of people start having the same experience, it means something. And scientists need to take a look at it. There was no scientifically validated tool, which is what scientists and journal articles want. So it was really hard getting that first article done because, they were like, we don't want you going to these chat rooms to recruit people. You're going to have a self-selected bias sample. I think you should go to like a psychology undergrad class. And I'm like, but there might not be any maladaptive daydreamers in that class. Like, if you want to describe something new, you need to go to the places where those people are. And I realize that it's just very hard to get something new written about, because they want you to use scientifically validated screening tools, but those don't exist, right? And they wanted a control group and an MD group. But how do you diagnose someone with MD if there's no screening tool to do it, right? Because at the time there wasn't, or there's no diagnostics code in the DSM. So the only way you could really differ between the two groups is by self-selection, which they didn't like. So it just kind of showed me how hard it is to get something new. So that's why, Dr. Sommer working on this validated screening tool, like, now that there's a validated screening tool, that opens the door for so much research. But to get that, oh my gosh, I remember journal articles, editors, we got turned down by many journal editors. And it was all because we were using these chat rooms to select participants and that we didn't have a control group. And I was like, you need a control group if you're studying medication or something. But when you're trying to describe something new, I personally didn't see the point of a control group. We're going to ask people who don't daydream about their daydreams. I thought it was pretty weird. But I had this aha moment of this is why I couldn't get help for all these years, because they sort of, dismiss my experiences and they dismiss all of the other people out there as anecdotal evidence. So at least that problem is behind us now that we have the scientifically validated tool.
I actually wanted to jump to the topic of being cured from maladaptive daydreaming. A lot of people are also interested in finding a way to, well, we say cured in quotation marks because people don't want to get rid of their daydreams. They just want treatment for it. Did you find a way to treat your maladaptive daydreaming?
I did. Now, the thing is, there's so much we don't know. And so what works for me isn't going to necessarily work for everybody else. And we still don't know, to this day. I think, I guess I shouldn't speak for Dr. Sommer, but I was going to say, we don't know whether maladaptive daydreaming is its own entity or, a symptom of other entities, or is it both? So for example, let's take insomnia, right? Insomnia can be its own disorder, but it can also be a part of anxiety and depression, right? And all of those other things. So to this day, I don't really know, did I have OCD and it just kind of manifested as maladaptive daydreaming? Because the medication that I used is helpful in OCD, and OCD runs in my family, right? So when I took the Luvox, it took about 6 weeks, but if I got on high enough a dose, the daydreaming kind of went away completely, which I did not like. So I lowered the dose, and I called those years kind of the sweet spot, meaning that I was able to daydream when I wanted to. If I was on a long bus ride or if I was on a walk, but I had total control over it. And to me, those were the best years when it came to the daydreaming. These days, I have trouble daydreaming at all. And I don't love that. I think some of that could be getting older. If I had a choice between not being able to daydreaming and the maladaptive, I guess I would pick the present, because the maladaptive was just so all-consuming and exhausting. But it was really nice to have that sweet spot when you were able to do it, but it was under control. And for me, that required medication. Everybody is different. And I do not recommend this at all, but just to show that it worked, I would play around with the medication. So if I knew I had a 3-hour bus ride, I would maybe go down on the medication a little bit so I could have really great daydreams on the bus. But then when I really had a focus, I would go up on it. And I'm not recommending that people do that, but everybody is different. And I did, Dimmer we were part of, I thought, a really fascinating discussion that we put on YouTube, where there were 2 people who consider themselves immersive daydreamers, and as well as the 2 of us. And the immersive daydreamers, their daydreams, I think, are very similar in quality as to mine. But the difference is that they felt like they just had complete control over it. Just like, watching TV, there's nothing wrong with watching an hour or 2 of TV every day. But I got to the point where I felt like it was on all day, every day. And I felt like doing that more than the things in my real life. And it became exhausting and hard to keep up with the reality. So that line between what's immersive and maladaptive is really kind of tricky. And I also think it might have been why in early years I might have had a hard time getting help, because I did talk to like one of the world's, prior to Dr. Sills, most known experts on daydreaming. And he was like, no, daydreaming could never be a problem. It's creative and beneficial. And I later found some of his writings saying, he had this extensive, wonderful fantasy world. And like for him, it was probably always wonderful. And, I use the analogy with alcohol. Like a lot of people love alcohol. There's nothing wrong with having some margaritas. But for some people, it becomes compulsive. And I think that, because the prior researchers found it fun and creative and just a wonderful thing, they didn't really see that it could be bad. But everybody's experience is different. It's a range, and we all, what some people can have these daydreams and it not be a problem, but for others it gets compulsive. Everybody's different. For me, I don't believe that I could have gotten a handle on it without the medication. Like it was just too compulsive, and I don't think that therapy or and everybody's different. Like mine might have been rooted in my family's history of OCD, and I became sort of obsessive about like replaying the scenes over and over again until they got perfect. And I don't think I would have been able to get over that without the medication. But somebody else whose root is not OCD, but maybe they have social anxiety, or maybe they have trauma. Like for them, maybe medication won't work. And so like, while I'm no longer a researcher, I do hear from people, hundreds of people from all around the world. And what I'm noticing is that like for some people, Lux works completely. Others don't. For some people, Prozac and Paxil have worked, whereas Prozac did nothing for me. Some people therapy works, some people worked meditation. So it's like, since we all have different entry ways to it, right? Some of us is trauma, some of it's OCD, some of it's anxiety, some of it is Asperger's. So like some of it is because the underlying causes are different. What works in treatment is going to be different, and we just don't know enough about it.
Yeah, we're definitely kind of shotgunning it and seeing what sticks. The researchers, as far as I'm aware, mostly recommend therapy. They haven't recommended medication at all, but there is no official treatment protocol. And we don't actually get to talk very often to people who have it under control, to people who have been cured, especially for such a long time. So we actually had some questions that the community had come up with. They're a little more personal, but they're like, do you still have the urge to daydream? Do you miss your characters? These are things that people worry about. They worry about losing their characters and if they're going to miss them and regret treatment.
I don't regret treatment at all. Do I occasionally miss the ability to daydream in that fashion? Yes, especially when a lot of, real life comes in its way. So I'll find, because I always used to wonder, like, well, what do other people think about in the shower or in the middle of the night when they wake up, or at other times a day. And so a lot of times that's getting replaced by real life worries. And frankly, that's not always fun, right? Like there are times when I'm like, I wish I could not think about what's going on at work and daydream instead. And I've had some really pretty serious health problems, and I regretted that I didn't have my characters, I'm not going to lie, to comfort me. That said, overall, on the quality of my life, I do think it's been better without that compulsive need to daydream. So do I have moments where I'd be like, yeah, I wish I could just, especially like I had a pretty bad health challenge the last couple of years, and I spent a lot of time worrying about my health. And I really wished I could just like, escape to La La Land or Daydream Land, and I couldn't. And that made me sad. I'm not going to lie, but I still wouldn't go back to that compulsive place where I felt the need to do it. So it's like this it's this nostalgic missing, but you lose the craving, right? So you don't have that, like, it's not like you have this urge and this craving and then you can't do it. And that is freeing.
So the way that you're explaining how you're currently feeling or dealing with maladaptive daydreaming is that you don't have an urge to daydream at all?
Exactly. I mean, I still can daydream a little bit, not the way I used to. And I will, like when I had the health issues or other issues going on in my life, like I did try to like binge watch television shows so that at least I could divert my mind. I did find I was like, you know what, binge watching television is at least then I wake up in the middle of the night, I can think about the television show. And I thought that was helpful, but it's never got to the point and never ever again got to the point where there was this urge and compulsive need to do it. And that's freeing. I have to be honest. That's really freeing.
I've talked to a lot of people, and some of us have kind of gotten more and more control of our daydreaming and kind of our addictions. And like you said earlier, it's hard to tell where the issues from the comorbid disorder start, and if some of them is some of it's directly from the maladaptive daydreaming.
This is Halo, an audience member who wanted to ask a question. Halo mentioned here that many people improve their daydreaming from, say, 8 hours to 20 minutes a day, and all of a sudden many of their other issues started to lessen. Many of their concentration issues, physical fatigue, or brain fog, and other kind of issues. So Halo was wondering if Jayne, when she felt better with her treatment, also felt better in her symptoms, and whether these experiences could be used in future references to show that some of these issues could be starting directly from the maladaptive daydreaming itself.
If the symptoms are improving as you're daydreaming less.
I know when I used to daydream for hours, there were physical symptoms like headaches and my eyes would feel really heavy. Like that went away completely, right? And that in itself was like freeing. You know, it's hard I still to this day don't know. Like for me, is maladaptive daydreaming a subset of OCD? And so I don't like I have heard. I mean, I don't want to scare people from getting better, but sometimes the opposite happens, right? If it's a coping mechanism, right? So if it's a coping mechanism for social anxiety or for depression or whatever, you know, daydreaming less might make those things come to the forefront. And that's not fun for a period of time, but then you can work on those things. So again, I think everybody's different and it's just so hard. So what can happen, you know, for me, this really was my main psychological symptom. So when this went away, my mental health was just 1,000 times better. But I have heard from other people, like when this went away, okay, maybe the depression, maybe the social anxiety, maybe the other things. And while that doesn't feel good, that's not necessarily a bad thing because then they can deal on those things. And for people who are afraid of getting cured, like, and I hate the word cured, but, and you know, you can't tell anyone what to feel, but like, I don't believe that you have to get rid of it completely. You just have to learn to control it. So if you can do that, there's really nothing to fear because you both, you know, you have the best of both worlds. You have it when you want it, but it's under control. Right. And for me, it was a slow process of like, you know, in recent years, I've just done it less and less, but it's not like that happened overnight. So I would encourage people not to be afraid of getting better. But it's like one of the things that upsets me is when I get emails from people saying, not upsets me, but I feel bad about is when people are like, oh my God, I've done this my whole life and I didn't realize I had a psychiatric problem and now I think I'm crazy. Like that upsets me because that's no, if you didn't think it was a problem and it didn't bother you and you think it just enhances your life, then that's great. Like then it's not, I don't want people who didn't think that they had a problem to think that they had a problem because I know, you know, 2 people in my own family who have wonderful imaginations and they just think it's a wonderful thing. But they can do it. Like, you know, like I might watch TV for an hour or 2 a day. They'll daydream for an hour or 2 a day. I just couldn't do that. It was 24/7.
You had mentioned earlier, you know, back when you were looking and you found that paper and you found that forum, but that's literally all that was out there. There were no communities yet. There weren't even really communities that you could created. And this wasn't that long ago. It was 2009, 2011, that kind of range.
Yeah. So that we're talking about a decade.
Yeah, and we have built communities since then. The biggest one I think currently is Reddit has, I believe, just hit 63,000 members.
I mean, I couldn't find one, and now there's 63,000. So that's just really incredible. And there's something like 39 million visitors on TikTok on the hashtag.
Yeah. The numbers on a platform like that are crazy. Now, when people are looking it up, they can find us. They can come and they can talk to us and compare experiences.
Here, Demmer asked whether Jayne was involved in the creation of Wild Minds, an online forum for maladaptive daydreamers.
No, I mean I know the woman who who created it, and she was part or very helpful in the early. I think that was like one of the first websites. So she, I believe, worked with the person who did my case study on it in the very early days.
Somebody had told me that researchers had helped her start up that site.
It was my co-searcher, Cynthia Sheback, and she was the creator of Wild Minds was just extremely helpful. I think that's where we got a lot of our because I don't think there was Reddit back then. Maybe there was, but Wild Minds is who helped us get a lot of our participants.
Yeah, it was Wild Minds first, and then Reddit came a couple of years later. Reddit wasn't even a player back then. We only had a couple hundred people at that time, while Wild Minds was getting into the thousands. We only surpassed them the past few years.
Here, Jayne mentions that when her first case study came out, it had something around 80,000 views before being found on some site and getting taken down.
I think for copyright reasons, but it was because there was there was nothing out there, and then it just exploded.
I remember, a little rambly here, but searching just like you did online in the kind of early days of the internet. Not too early. I'm not that old, but but I remember looking, and the first word I found, I didn't find maladaptive daydreaming. It hadn't become a thing yet, but I found paracosm, and I remember Googling paracosm and in all sorts of ways, just trying to find something, and I finally found this random guy, his website, where he was just detailing his story, his inner world, and talking about his imagination. And he was definitely like now looking back, I know that he was probably a maladaptive or immersive daydreamer, but at the time that didn't exist. And I just emailed this random dude who had written about his paracosm, like asking him questions and stuff.
Back in the day when it just was not, people didn't know. And still a mental health professional, like we all know, but mental health professionals still don't know.
Dimmer mentions here that in regards to community and people finding out about maladaptive daydreaming, it tends to be random people stumbling across a meme or Googling their symptoms, but there aren't a whole lot of professionals. We're mainly getting people who are pushed to that point of reaching out.
Nobody really knows what they're doing. Even the communities. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm going off on a rant here. Communities, what I do. I got a lot to say about it. Like, even the communities that we have right now, they weren't made, I'm so sorry to my other fellow community leaders, but they weren't made by people who have any idea what they're doing. Like, I don't know how to run a community. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, there wasn't anyone else. And I just feel like we're placeholders for the next generation of people who are going to come in and understand, community management inside and out, and maybe even have a background in something like that, are going to start making websites and places that are really professional. And that's what I hope anyway. That is my vision for the future of the community. But what is yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, I love that the communities are out there, and I wish, I wish that they existed when I was a kid and a teenager and young adult and felt so alone. And it makes me so happy to feel that a young person today Googling it. I mean, that the hours I spent in the library coming up, and it was just so depressing to come up empty-handed. So to think that someone today is not going to have to go through that is amazing. And I think the support of each other and sharing ideas, I think these communities are a really wonderful thing.
Jayne continues to mention here that the downside of any community is the amount of misinformation and misdiagnoses going on in them.
I think I saw one discussion on someone said, "Oh, you don't have maladaptive daydreaming, you have addictive daydreaming." And I'm thinking, okay, they're one and the same. There's barely maladaptive daydreaming, no. Or someone else posted just today, "Oh, I think, this is all our parents' faults." And for some, there's just a lot of armchair psychology going on without professional help. And I think that's okay. I think people need a place to talk. Professional sites like Dr. Somer has, that's all about the research, and which is really important, because if you want researchers to take it seriously, you need that. I would like to see a place, and I'd love to see a place where there's a mix of community and professionals. And frankly, I want that for maladaptive daydreaming. I'd also like to see that for, my the same thing is happening on my other health issues. And to be honest, I think it's slightly more dangerous there because people are suggesting medication to take and supplements to take, and there's no real medical help on those sites at all. So my dream would be to create some sort of community where there's kind of moderated discussion of people bring up their issues, but professionals are helping moderate the discussion.
Jayne mentions here that she'd like to see more professional spaces discussing maladaptive daydreaming, and that she's working on one, as well as Dr. Sommer being interested and other researchers she'd be interested in talking to as well, such as the psychologists who research pacing in maladaptive daydreaming. She also mentioned that she's been trying to show doctors in professional spaces online, such as the Medical Amino, the research or feedback from maladaptive daydreamers, but many are unprofessional about the way they respond.
You don't, they keep saying, you don't know who these people are. You don't know if they're making it all up, which is ridiculous because obviously why would anyone make it up? But to get academics and doctors and researchers to pay attention, you need a little more professional guidance on the sites.
That's actually something that I've been wondering about a lot. How can the community improve on that? Dimmer mentioned TikTok, and unfortunately it's a problem on social media where there's a lot of romanticizing and spreading of misinformation. And you mentioned the moderating, although that's quite difficult to do on a place like TikTok, where people are basically free to say what they want. How do you think the maladaptive daydreaming community can improve in terms of this?
Everybody does have a right to their opinion. So when we say romanticizing, some people might be immersive daydreamers. So for them, it's great, right? But that's not the same for maladaptive daydreamers, right? So I do think, though, if you're going to put maladaptive daydreamers and immersive daydreamers together, I could see some disagreements breaking out, right? Or people accusing. And I think that's just the nature of a community-run social media, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, like I said, I think it's for whatever downside of the misinformation, I think it's worth it because it makes people feel less alone. But I also just envision maybe creating something new, which I'm trying to do, but I'd love community members to do it with me, where we just have some more moderated discussions, right, of things like whether they're interviews, but it's really hard because I got to be honest, younger people today like 30-second videos, right, to really have to have a detailed understanding about there can be immersive daydreaming, but there can also be maladaptive daydreaming, and both things can be true at once. That's really hard to show in 30 seconds. Dimmer, I thought that conversation that we had was really fascinating because we talked to immersive daydreamers who love their daydream worlds and don't think it's a problem. And if you listen, you see the nuances of how mine and Dimmer's became maladaptive, but it does require an attention span, right? It was a 25-minute video, it wasn't a 30-second video. And it's just on social media, I don't know if you can get people to listen to those nuances. I'm working on a site, and I'd love, maybe we could be put together a board of community members to help generate content and interview researchers as well as community members. So I guess my point is, I don't think we need to change what already exists. I think we just need to add to it.
I absolutely agree, because there actually aren't that many maladaptive daydreaming communities. What do we got? We got Facebook, that's got a couple thousand members. Reddit's the biggest one. Discord a little bit. And Wild Minds. Wild Minds is still running under new management now. But that's it. That's a handful. We can count those on one hand. There's hundreds for anxiety, and for every different kind of anxiety. And we just don't have that for maladaptive daydreaming yet. Our big community, like the Reddit, for example, has to be a place where every single kind of MDer needs a place to talk. And that does cause friction in the community a bit, where the people who are very severe and need to, for their own health, approach it, in a more strict way, they get upset when they see silly memes and people making light of things. And then on the other side, you have a maladaptive daydreamer who comes at it with a sense of humor, somebody whose goal is to integrate it into their life. And they get upset when they see people, gatekeeping. They say, what are you even doing here? You don't seem to need support.
I mean, it's almost like I could almost imagine, like, if there was something on alcohol, right? Like, you're going to have people being like, oh, yeah, alcohol's great. And then you're going to have other people being like, oh, my God, it's ruining my life. So it's like, I mean, I just like try to remind people that everybody's experience is their experience, and it doesn't mean it's not true for them, but it doesn't mean it's true for someone else. And I honestly believe that's why I wasn't able to get help for so many years, because I think there was some immersive daydreamers out there doing the research, being like, this is great and wonderful. Like, I mean, that really was what I was told. Like, that was what the one doctor said. She just needs to be educated that daydreaming is okay. Right. That's what I was told. And I think it is okay for some people, but I know as someone who's been a maladaptive daydreamer, and I hate the word cured, but I will at least say it's not an issue in my life anymore. I can tell you that my life is better without that compulsive need to daydream. So, I mean, I think, I'm like a one-person case study, although science doesn't believe in one person's experiences, but I do. So I think, I mean, I just think Dimmer, I think you have your job cut out for you, because I think the goal on like the places like the Reddit site is just making sure everybody feels comfortable and just constantly reminding people, like, okay, that is your experience, but that doesn't mean, you need to be respectful of somebody else's experience, right? And, maybe there's a different group for which there are, but I feel like there's some immersive people on the maladaptive pages, but, maybe there's some like questions for the maladaptive section. You really have to feel like it's a problem in your life. There's always going to be like people who disagree and get offended, and I don't think there's anything you can do about it. I still think it's, other than to encourage people to be kind to one another and understand that everybody's experience is different. I still think it's better to have it than not have it. But I also think we should consider maybe all working together on something that is a little more of a moderated discussion. Because there's so many issues that and people just throw them out as questions like, hey, like, what do you guys think about dating? Like, but let's, and then there's, people just put their own answers. But like, what if we had a guided, conversation, maybe with a therapist, talking about, I mean, for me, I know dating was really hard when I was in my serious MDD days, because like, I just couldn't stand having a person in my space because it encroached on my daydream time. So, or, there's just hundreds of topics that we would cover, but I'd like to see a place where they can be done in somewhat of a moderated way. So I'd love, Dimmer, we just asked anyone who wants to work with me on getting such a site. I also think a benefit to that is you can show it to people. Again, not as much as in this, but like I've tried to have doctors look at some internet chat rooms, and they're like, oh, no, this is just, not science, not real. But I think if there's something that's got researchers and a lot of numbers, we could show people that it is real. Obviously, Dr. Sommer's doing that as well, but just another tool in the toolbox. There are people out there I guess I was talking to someone today who's a mom. She had no idea what to do when her child was spinning in circles, right? And you go to professionals, they don't know what to tell you. And there's a program at a major hospital where they're working on trying to reduce that spinning in circle. They're not doing anything about the mental component. And I find that program troubling, first of all, because I do think a lot of kids do grow out of it. And for some kids, it does not become maladaptive. It's only immersive. And even for those who it is going to become maladaptive, like just focusing on the movement is not helpful. So, and for things like that, like just numbers help, right? Like, so just the more numbers we can get, because and it just makes me happy to think that just young people today, at least, there's not treatment options, but at least they don't feel alone.
Yeah, it boggles my mind when I see just new members come in and they're like, oh, I'm 14.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, I didn't find this till I was 27.
I mean, I read the DSM when I was 12 years old, cover to cover, trying to find it and didn't find it. So, but also a 12-year-old today is not going to read the DSM. They're going to go to the internet and they're going to find it. So that makes me happy that, that they're going to find something. And that's why, like, yeah, I understand. Demar, you as an administrator can find probably Reddit frustrating because in any community, people have different perspectives and they're going to get annoyed with each other. So I'm sure that the administrating of it could be frustrating, but overall, just what it does for people so that they don't feel alone is worth it in the end. That said, I think we also should, create another, work on creating another site that has, something slightly more moderated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone in the audience, I don't know, who builds things like that?
I'd love, just doing, I'm just like, I haven't invested a lot of time in it, but I'm doing some just YouTube videos on, interviewing people. So if anyone has any ideas and and I know, like, again, people don't like to spend 25 minutes of their time, but I really did think that discussion on the difference between immersive and maladaptive was really fascinating. And I think I think it got to the nuances in a way that a 60-second TikTok video can't. On like, how could something, because, Dr. Somo's theory, and I agree with it, is that some of us are just born with this innate ability to create these worlds in our head, right? And for some people, it's a really great thing. Like, I think they're writers and actors and like have just done wonderful things with it. And I think for immersive daydreamers, even who haven't done wonderful things with it, love it. But you need that interview showed that, like, there is a difference that, for me and you, it became compulsive in a way that it didn't for immersive daydreamers. And like, there's no way to really understand that nuance in a 60-second TikTok video. Unfortunately, we live in a world where 30 to 60-second TikTok videos are the way to go.
Yeah, we'll put the links to all your stuff. It's the YouTube channel is Maladaptive Daydreamer with Jayne Rachael. And then you have that website, Overcoming Together.
Yeah. And like right now, it's like with me, but like, again, the goal is really to make it broader and have a team of us doing it.
All right, cool. That's it for this episode of Parallel Lives. Again, we apologize for the strange audio, but hopefully you still enjoyed listening regardless. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, feel free to join the Discord server and give yourself the podcast role. You can find links to our broadcasting sites as well as the server in the description below if you're listening on YouTube. With that being said, thanks again for your support. We appreciate it. Goodbye.